She was just a small-town waitress, working long hours to keep her mother alive and her father's diner running. One cold morning, she offered free coffee to a ragged old man who couldn't pay. What Emily didn't know was that the poor customer was actually billionaire Richard Dawson in disguise, searching for a reason to believe in humanity again. Her simple kindness shattered the walls he had built around his heart. Day after day he returned, drawn to her warmth, until the truth exploded. The man she thought was penniless was one of the richest men in America. Betrayal, doubt, and media frenzy followed. But what started as a test of kindness became a story of trust, redemption, and love. In the end, Emily proved that true wealth isn't measured in billions. It's found in compassion, and one small act of kindness can change a life forever. It was a chilly morning in downtown Chicago, and the diner on the corner of Maple Street was slowly filling with the regulars who came in for their daily fix of caffeine before heading to work. The air smelled of fresh pastries and roasted beans, and behind the counter, Emily, a young waitress with tired but kind eyes, was moving briskly from table to table with her usual warmth. She'd been working double shifts ever since her mother fell sick, and though exhaustion weighed on her shoulders, she never let it show to the customers. Kindness, she believed, didn't cost anything, and perhaps that belief kept her spirit alive. The bell above the door jingled, and a man shuffled inside, his coat tattered, his beard unkempt, and his shoes worn out from too many miles walked. His eyes darted nervously around the diner as though he didn't belong, and a few customers turned their heads away, unwilling to meet his gaze. He moved hesitantly to the counter, clutching an old leather satchel, and sat on one of the stools, his presence barely acknowledged except for a few whispers at the back booth. Emily noticed him immediately. Something about his frail hands and the weariness in his face stirred a feeling of compassion. She walked over with a smile, holding her notepad, though she already guessed what he might say. "Good morning, sir. Can I get you something?" The man cleared his throat, his voice rough, as though unused to kindness. "Just a cup of coffee, if it's not too much." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a few coins, placing them carefully on the counter. Emily glanced at the change. It wasn't enough for even the cheapest item on the menu. She hesitated, then gently pushed the coins back toward him. "Keep it," she said softly. "Coffee's on the house today." His tired eyes widened, surprised at her words. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to be a burden." She shook her head, already pouring the hot brew into a chipped mug and placing it before him. "You're not a burden. Everyone deserves a warm cup of coffee in the morning." He wrapped his hands around the mug, and for the first time, his lips curled into a faint smile. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice breaking slightly. The warmth of the drink seemed to bring life back into him, and he watched Emily move around the diner, her kindness shining through every interaction. What she didn't know was that this poor customer wasn't who he seemed to be. Beneath the ragged clothes and the unshaven face was Richard Dawson, one of the wealthiest men in the city, a billionaire known for his ruthless business acumen. But Richard had grown disillusioned with the world of luxury and corporate greed. Too many people surrounded him for what he could offer, not for who he was. He'd begun testing strangers, disguising himself to see how they treated someone with nothing to give. Time and again, he had faced cold shoulders, dismissive stares, and even insults. Until now, Emily's simple gesture of kindness pierced through the cynicism he had built up over the years. She hadn't judged him, hadn't turned him away, and hadn't asked for anything in return. He studied her carefully as she worked, her laughter ringing softly as she chatted with an elderly couple, the way she knelt down to hand a coloring sheet to a restless child, and how she never once lost patience. Richard felt something stir inside him that he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The other waitress, Carla, leaned over to Emily when she returned to the counter. "You know he's not going to pay, right?" she muttered, nodding toward the man. Emily simply smiled. "That's okay. Sometimes people need kindness more than we need payment." Carla rolled her eyes, but Richard's heart swelled at the words. He sipped his coffee slowly, savoring not just the warmth of the drink, but the rare warmth of human decency. As the diner grew busier, Emily barely had time to catch her breath, but each time she passed the counter, she checked on him, refilling his mug without being asked. Hours slipped by, and though Richard could have left unnoticed, he stayed watching her. The world outside saw her as just another waitress in a small diner, but to him she was something extraordinary, a reminder that compassion still existed. By the time the lunch rush began, Emily's hair had slipped loose from her bun, and fatigue shadowed her face, but she still moved with energy, still smiled, still gave each customer the same attention. Richard knew then that this encounter wasn't over. She had given him something priceless, proof that kindness didn't need wealth to exist. He had come to the diner looking for a glimpse of humanity, and he had found it in the form of a young woman who offered free coffee to a stranger. As Emily cleared a nearby table, Richard spoke, his voice stronger now. "Miss, may I ask your name?" She looked up, surprised that he wanted to know. "Emily," she answered simply. "Well, Emily," he said, a spark of determination in his eyes, "you've done more for me today than you realize." She chuckled lightly, brushing it off. "It's just coffee," but he shook his head slowly. "No, it's much more than that." She gave him a puzzled look, unaware that the man sitting before her, who appeared to be a weary wanderer, was in fact planning a gesture that would soon change her life forever. And as Richard finished the last sip of his coffee, he made up his mind. This waitress, with her unshakable kindness, would soon learn who he truly was. The lunch rush finally calmed, and Emily leaned against the counter for a brief moment, wiping the sweat from her brow. Richard was still there, though his posture had shifted. He was no longer slouched like a man beaten down by the world. Instead, his eyes held a quiet intensity as he observed her every move. Emily, unaware of the weight behind his gaze, simply offered him another refill. "Last one's on me too," she said with a playful smile. He nodded, his mind spinning with thoughts of how he could repay such kindness without revealing himself just yet. Richard had spent years surrounded by people who only saw him as a wallet, people who would bend rules, betray friends, even sacrifice their dignity for a share of his empire. Yet here was a woman who gave away what little she had to a stranger without hesitation. He wanted to know more about her. "Emily," he said carefully, "you work long hours." She chuckled softly, stacking mugs. "Too long. But it pays the bills, mostly." He tilted his head. "Mostly?" She sighed, lowering her voice as if sharing a secret with a friend. "My mom's sick. Medical bills aren't cheap. Some days I think I'll never catch up, but giving up isn't an option, you know?" Richard's chest tightened. He recognized that resolve, the same fire that had fueled him when he started his first company decades ago, long before the skyscrapers and the luxury estates. He leaned closer. "And yet, even with all that, you still gave me coffee for free." She shrugged, embarrassed. "Everyone deserves a little kindness. I just hope if I was ever in your shoes, someone would do the same for me." Her words sank into him like an anchor, pulling him deeper into a conviction he hadn't felt in years. For a man who had everything, he realized he had lost the most important thing, faith in humanity. As the afternoon faded, Richard rose to leave, gripping the strap of his worn satchel. Emily noticed how carefully he carried it, as though it held something precious, despite its shabby exterior. "Thank you again," he said. "I'll come back tomorrow if that's all right." She smiled brightly. "You'll always have a seat here." With that, he left, blending into the crowd outside, but his mind was already racing. Back in his penthouse that evening, stripped of his disguise, Richard gazed out over the glittering city skyline. His reflection in the glass showed the powerful man the world knew, but all he could think of was the waitress who saw none of it and treated him with dignity anyway. He made a decision. He would return, but not merely as a test. He wanted to truly understand her life, her struggles, her dreams. The following morning, Richard dressed once again in ragged clothes, more determined than ever. The diner greeted him with the same warmth, and Emily's face lit up as she saw him walk through the door. Back again," she teased, placing a menu before him, though she knew he couldn't afford it. He nodded. "Back again." Day after day, this routine continued. He would come, order nothing more than coffee, and she would serve him with the same patience and kindness. But between refills, she began to open up, telling him about her late father who had built the diner she now worked in, about the small dreams she still carried despite the heavy responsibilities, and about how sometimes, when customers were kind in return, she felt a little less alone. Richard listened, storing away every detail. He asked questions, not out of politeness but genuine interest. For the first time in years, he wasn't Richard Dawson, billionaire. He was just a man sitting at a counter, sharing moments with someone who didn't care about his fortune. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the diner windows in hues of gold, Emily placed a slice of pie in front of him. "On the house," she said. Richard frowned. "Emily, you don't have to." She cut him off. "I want to. You remind me of my dad. He used to say no one should walk out hungry, no matter what their pocket looked like." Richard stared at the pie, then at her, overwhelmed by emotions he hadn't expected. This wasn't just kindness anymore. It was something purer, rarer. He realized Emily wasn't performing for recognition or pity. She was simply living her truth. That night he couldn't sleep. The thought haunted him. How could he, a man with billions at his disposal, sit by while someone like Emily struggled to keep her mother alive and her father's dream afloat? The contrast gnawed at him. For the first time, he felt ashamed of the walls of wealth he had built around himself. The next morning, Richard's disguise felt heavier than ever, but he wore it once more and headed to the diner. Emily greeted him with the same warmth, but this time she noticed something different in his eyes, a storm of emotions he seemed to wrestle with. She tilted her head curiously. "Everything all right?" He forced a smile. "Better than all right." What he didn't say was that he had made a decision, one that would turn her world upside down. Emily thought she was simply serving coffee to a poor old man. She had no idea she was sitting on the edge of a life-changing revelation, one that would soon draw reporters, lawyers, and whispers across the city. And Richard, for the first time in decades, felt excitement not about a deal or an acquisition, but about changing a single life. The life of a waitress who gave free coffee without expecting anything in return. Richard's visits had become a quiet rhythm in Emily's life, a constant presence she never questioned. Each morning, she'd see him shuffle in through the diner's door with that same satchel and that same tired smile, and she would greet him with coffee already brewing, as though expecting him all along. At first, she thought of him as just another lonely soul who needed kindness, but gradually she realized his presence calmed her too. When her shifts grew unbearable, when customers complained or bills piled up in her head, she found herself looking forward to his quiet company at the counter. Richard, meanwhile, was fighting a battle within himself. He had built empires, signed billion-dollar contracts, and bent markets to his will, yet here he was, nervous about revealing his true identity to a waitress. Each night, he sat in his penthouse, staring at his reflection, the disguise discarded on the floor, wondering how Emily would react once she knew. Would she feel betrayed? Would she hate him for hiding the truth? Or would she see his disguise as the desperate attempt of a lonely man to find someone genuine? These questions gnawed at him relentlessly. One Thursday afternoon, the diner was unusually quiet. The storm outside kept most customers at home, leaving Emily and Richard nearly alone, except for Carla, who was half distracted, scrolling her phone at a corner booth. Emily poured him another refill and leaned on the counter. "You know, I never asked what you did before," she said softly. Richard's heart skipped. He tightened his grip on the mug. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged. "Just curious. You don't talk like most people who've had it rough. You've got, I don't know, an air about you." Richard chuckled nervously. "An air?" She smiled. "Yeah, like you've seen more than you let on." He deflected. "Maybe I've just walked long roads." She tilted her head, sensing the layers beneath his words, but choosing not to press further. Instead, she told him about her latest struggle. Her mother's doctor had suggested an expensive new treatment, one Emily couldn't possibly afford. Richard listened, the ache in his chest deepening. That night he made a decision. Enough of hesitation. He would begin to change her life, slowly at first, testing how far she would trust him before the full truth unraveled. The next morning, Emily found an envelope tucked under the sugar dispenser at the counter. Inside was enough cash to cover a month of her mother's medication. She gasped, looking around, and saw Richard sitting calmly in his usual spot, sipping coffee. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling. He shrugged. "A friend helping a friend." She shook her head, thrusting the envelope back. "I can't take this. You need it more than I do." Richard pushed it gently toward her. "Emily, if you don't accept it, I'll only leave it here anyway. It's yours." Her eyes welled, torn between pride and desperation. Finally, she whispered, "Thank you. I don't know how to repay you." He smiled faintly. "You already have." The diner's bell jingled as another customer entered, and the moment passed, but something had shifted. Emily now looked at him differently, suspicion mingling with gratitude. Who was this man who claimed to be poor but could suddenly hand over so much money? Over the next week, little miracles began appearing. Her mother's hospital bill was mysteriously reduced. The diner received a shipment of fresh supplies paid in advance. Even the rent notice she dreaded vanished after a quiet phone call from the landlord. Emily's instincts told her Richard was behind it all, but when she confronted him, he only gave her that calm, unreadable smile. "Some blessings don't need explanations," he said. The mystery gnawed at her, yet she couldn't bring herself to press harder. She trusted him. Strange as it seemed, she trusted this man more than anyone else in her life. One evening, as the diner closed and rain lashed the windows, Emily offered him a ride home. "You'll catch pneumonia walking in this storm," she insisted. He hesitated, but finally agreed. She drove her old beat-up sedan through the slick streets, glancing at him as he stared out the window in silence. She dropped him off near a run-down shelter, watching him disappear inside. But something didn't fit. The way he carried himself, the way his words always carried weight, it was unlike any man who truly lived in poverty. Later that night, unable to sleep, she replayed every interaction in her mind, the money, the kindness, the subtle authority in his tone. She didn't know who he was, but she knew he was hiding something. Richard, meanwhile, lay awake in his penthouse, guilt gnawing at him. He had tried to ease her burdens without revealing the truth, but he realized deception could only last so long. If Emily discovered who he really was from someone else, it would shatter everything. He needed to tell her himself. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A week later, the diner buzzed unusually with chatter. News had broken across the city. Billionaire Richard Dawson had been spotted at a charity gala after weeks of absence from public view. The newspaper on the counter showed his photograph, sharp suit, clean-shaven face, unmistakable. Emily froze, her breath catching in her throat. The man in the paper, smiling stiffly at a line of photographers, was him. Not the ragged stranger she served coffee to every morning, but the billionaire in disguise. Her hands shook as she looked toward the counter. Richard was sitting there in his shabby coat, sipping coffee as though nothing had changed. She slammed the paper in front of him. This is you, isn't it?" The diner fell silent. Carla's eyes widened. Customers turned their heads, and Richard knew the moment he had both dreaded and longed for had finally come. He set down his cup slowly, met Emily's shocked eyes, and said quietly, "Yes, it's me." The words hung in the air like thunder. Emily's face went pale, betrayal warring with disbelief. "You lied to me," she whispered. He shook his head, his voice low but steady. "I never lied. I just didn't tell you everything. I needed to know if kindness still existed. And you, Emily, you showed me it does." She stepped back, her chest heaving. All this time you let me believe." Her voice broke. "Why me? Why test me?" His eyes glistened. "Because I had lost faith. I had everything money could buy, but I couldn't buy sincerity. I needed to find one person in this world who would treat me the same with or without wealth. And you did." Emily's hands trembled as she gripped the counter. The room spun with disbelief, but beneath the shock, a tiny part of her remembered every smile, every conversation, every refill of coffee shared without pretense. The disguise might have been false, but the connection had been real. Still, trust once shaken was not easily restored. She turned away, her voice tight. "I need time." Richard nodded, pain in his eyes. "Take all the time you need. Just know that everything I've done since that first cup of coffee has been for you." And as he rose to leave, the diner buzzed with whispers, reporters already circling outside, and Emily's world tilted on its axis. The poor customer she had once pitied was in truth a billionaire who had set her life on an entirely new path. Emily's world spun as she watched Richard walk out of the diner, the whispers of curious onlookers buzzing like hornets around her. Cameras flashed outside the window, reporters already circling once the story broke that the billionaire Richard Dawson had been discovered hiding in plain sight inside a corner diner. Carla's voice cut through the noise. "Do you realize who that was? You've been serving coffee to one of the richest men in the country." But Emily barely heard her. Her heart pounded with betrayal and confusion. She replayed every moment in her head. His tired smile, his gentle words, the envelopes of money, the way he listened to her as though she mattered. Now it all felt like a cruel joke, as though her kindness had been part of some experiment. She felt exposed, used. That night she couldn't sleep. Her mother asked why she was so quiet, but Emily only smiled faintly, hiding the storm inside. She wanted to believe Richard's words, that his disguise was not about mocking her, but about finding truth. But doubt gnawed at her. Billionaires weren't kind, at least not without reason. Why would he choose her of all people? The next morning, the diner was busier than ever. Curious customers filled every booth, hoping to catch a glimpse of the waitress who had unknowingly befriended a billionaire. Journalists hovered, their pens ready, their cameras flashing every time she moved. Emily felt trapped in a fishbowl, her ordinary life suddenly thrust into the spotlight. She hated it. She longed for the quiet mornings, when Richard was just a ragged stranger with kind eyes. That afternoon, as she cleared plates, a sleek black limousine pulled up outside. The chatter inside the diner hushed instantly. The door opened, and Richard stepped out, not in his disguise, but as the world knew him. Sharp, tailored suit, polished shoes, and an aura of power that commanded attention. The reporters surged forward, but his security detail held them back as he walked straight into the diner. Emily froze behind the counter, her pulse racing. Every eye turned to them as he stopped in front of her. "Emily," he said softly, his voice carrying both strength and humility. "Please, can we talk?" She wanted to turn away, to tell him to leave, but something in his eyes, genuine, vulnerable, kept her rooted. With a stiff nod, she gestured toward the back booth. They sat facing each other, the diner buzzing with hushed whispers. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally, Emily broke the silence, her voice trembling. "Why me? Out of everyone, why did you choose to walk into my diner in disguise?" Richard leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Because I was drowning in a world where everyone wanted something from me. Money, influence, power, never kindness. I needed to know if kindness still existed without a price tag. And then I met you." Her throat tightened. "Do you have any idea how it feels? To think you were helping someone who had nothing, only to find out it was a test? It feels humiliating," he winced. "It was never meant to humiliate you. I wasn't testing you to see if you would fail. I was hoping, praying, that someone like you still existed. And you proved it." She shook her head, tears welling in her eyes. "But you lied to me. Every day you let me believe you were someone else." He reached across the table, his voice thick with sincerity. "I didn't lie about what mattered. Every conversation, every moment we shared, it was real. You saw me as a man, not a billionaire. Do you know how rare that is?" Emily looked down, her hands trembling. Her heart wanted to believe him, but her mind screamed caution. "And now what?" she whispered. "What happens to me, to my life? Everyone's staring, everyone's talking. I didn't ask for this." Richard's gaze softened. "I know, and I'm sorry for dragging you into my world. But Emily, I don't want to walk away. You gave me something money never could, hope. And I want to give back, not because you served me coffee, but because you reminded me of the man I used to be before money consumed everything." She bit her lip, her heart warring with her pride. "You think throwing money at my problems will fix this?" His voice dropped, steady but emotional. "No, I think standing by your side might." Silence hung between them. For the first time, Emily saw not the billionaire from the newspapers, but the man who had sat at her counter day after day, listening to her stories, quietly easing her burdens. She realized the connection hadn't been fake, no matter the disguise. Still, trust wasn't rebuilt in a day. She wiped her eyes and whispered, "If you really mean that, then prove it. Not with money. With actions." Richard nodded, relief flickering across his face. "Then give me the chance. I'll prove it to you." He rose slowly, aware of the cameras flashing through the window, and extended his hand. For a long moment, Emily stared at it, her pride urging her to refuse. But something deeper, something that remembered his quiet laughter and his listening silence, made her place her hand in his. Gasps rippled through the diner as reporters captured the moment, but Emily ignored them. For the first time since the revelation, she saw a glimmer of the truth. Behind the billions, Richard Dawson was still the man who cherished a simple cup of coffee shared with kindness. Yet deep down, she knew this was only the beginning. The world would not let them exist quietly. Her life was no longer hers alone, and whether she liked it or not, the storm had only just begun. The days that followed felt like living inside a whirlwind. Emily found herself on the front pages of newspapers, her face plastered on television screens, and her name whispered across social media. She hated it. Every customer who walked into the diner now came not for the pancakes or the coffee, but for a glimpse of the waitress who had unknowingly befriended a billionaire. Some treated her like a celebrity, others with envy, and a few even with scorn, accusing her of seeking attention or fortune. Emily wanted none of it. She wanted her quiet life back, the life where kindness didn't make headlines. Richard, however, remained determined. Each day he returned, not in disguise this time, but as himself. His limousine outside drew gawkers. His tailored suits drew stares, but he walked in humbly, greeting her with the same soft tone as before. He respected her space, never overwhelming her, yet always making it clear he wasn't walking away. He began helping in small ways that weren't about money, fixing the leaky roof of the diner through a quiet contractor, arranging for volunteers to repaint the walls, donating food supplies without attaching his name. Emily watched carefully, her skepticism slowly softening. She saw that behind the wealth, Richard was trying to prove himself as a man of action, not just promises. One night, after the diner closed, Emily sat with him at their usual booth, exhaustion etched on her face. "I don't understand why you care so much," she whispered. "You could have gone back to your skyscraper life and forgotten about me." Richard leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Because you reminded me who I am. Before the billions, I was just a man with a dream, working late nights, scraping coins together. Somewhere along the way I lost that part of myself, but you brought it back." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "But the world sees me as nothing more than a waitress. I don't belong in your world." His voice was firm, unshakable. "Emily, it's not about where you belong. It's about who you are. And who you are is someone who gave without asking, who stood tall when life knocked you down. That's the kind of person anyone would be lucky to have by their side." The silence stretched between them, heavy with meaning, until Emily finally whispered, "Then prove it not to me, but to them." She gestured toward the world outside, the flashing cameras, the doubters, the judgmental eyes. Richard nodded slowly, knowing she was right. The very next week, Richard stunned the city by making a public announcement. At a press conference streamed live across the nation, he stood before microphones, cameras flashing, and declared, "This is Emily Carter, the woman who reminded me that kindness is worth more than gold. She gave me a cup of coffee when I had nothing, expecting nothing in return. And today, I want the world to know that wealth means nothing if it cannot be used to uplift people like her. Emily, standing beside him, trembled under the attention, but his words struck deep. Reporters shouted questions. Skeptics accused her of being a gold digger, but Richard silenced them with a single line. If anyone deserves respect, it's not me for having billions, but her for giving when she had so little. The narrative shifted overnight. People began to see Emily not as a woman chasing wealth, but as the symbol of something purer, genuine compassion in a cynical world. The diner became a beacon of hope, drawing crowds not just for curiosity, but to feel a piece of the story. Emily, though overwhelmed, found herself realizing something extraordinary. She had not lost her life. It had transformed. But the most important moment came later, away from cameras and headlines. One quiet evening, Richard invited her to the rooftop of his skyscraper, where the city lights stretched endlessly like stars below. He turned to her, no disguise, no reporters, just a man baring his soul. "Emily," he said, his voice trembling slightly for the first time, "I don't want this to be about coffee or kindness or even redemption. I want this to be about us. You saw me when I was invisible. You cared when no one else did. And I've fallen in love with you for it." Emily's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding. She had told herself to guard her feelings, to be careful. But standing there under the glittering skyline, she realized the truth. Despite everything, she had grown to love him too. But it wasn't the billionaire she loved. It was the man who sat at her counter, tired and quiet, sipping coffee as though it was the only warmth he had. With tears in her eyes, she whispered, "I love you too, Richard. Not for who the world says you are, but for who you were when you walked into my diner." His face broke into a smile, one unguarded and full of relief, as he pulled her into his arms. The city roared beneath them, but in that moment they existed in their own world. The billionaire and the waitress, two souls who had found each other through the simplest act of kindness. Their story had begun with a free cup of coffee, and now it was spilling into a future neither could have imagined. But the true hook lay not in the romance or the riches. It lay in the reminder, echoing through every heart that heard their tale, that one small act of kindness could change everything, even the life of a billionaire in disguise.